Okay. So I'm Steve Levine. My company is Ignite Consulting Partners, and what we try to do is help you manage your risk, whether it is your legal risk, lawsuits, compliance, reputational risk. We're all about protecting your business. And I call myself an accidental compliance lawyer. I did not sit in law school dreaming to be doing this. I'm going to date myself. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I wanted to be Cusack from LA Law. So I get out of law school and I go to work for a litigation firm, and I learn they don't tell you everything in law school. They don't tell you that as a young lawyer, or baby lawyer as I refer to them, you don't get to do the big $1 million cases. You get to do the stuff that nobody else wants to do. And in my firm, that was going to court on car dealer cases. You know, the collector that cursed me and harassed me and chased me around. The salesman didn't tell me all the problems with the car. The transmission fell out on the way home. Those kind of cases. So I did those for about 10 years. And lo and behold, I got pretty good at it. But that was at a time when, compliance wasn't even a buzzword. You went to court and it was kind of the Wild West. And maybe the deal file was 6 or 8 pages, and nobody really did anything to train their staff. There were no policies and procedures. There were no controls in place. So I learned pretty quickly that, hey, if I want to help my clients, we need to have a story to tell. And you're going to hear me talk about 2 things a lot. Anybody that's heard me speak before, you hear this a lot. You have to have a story to tell, and you have to have enough that you're doing to discourage the regulators and discourage the plaintiff's lawyers. I tell my clients, I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to do enough to where you're discouraging the folks that are looking at you, and they're going to go on, and they're going to go on down the road and go for easier pickings. So really, philosophically, those early days doing litigation are what created the methodology that I still use today. It is all about putting you guys in a position to protect your businesses, because I've been doing this 30 plus years. I have never seen a climate like there is today. I'm just telling you what it is. I have never seen this many regulatory issues. You've got these 2 monster regulators, the federal government, the FTC and the CFPB. You have a lot of state regulators that are parroting whatever they say. If I look back at what state examinations used to be maybe like 8 years ago to what they are now, they are very scary. They're a lot different. So this talk is all about putting you guys in a position to where you could withstand that scrutiny. And I'm really excited to be at this conference. This is my first time at this conference. I have heard great things at this conference. I have had clients go to this conference. I love the opportunity to be here, because I'll be honest with you, a lot of times when I get calls from leasing companies, it could be a kind of a tenuous, tense conversation at first, because I find that a lot of leasing companies, a lot of people in our business, they didn't start out doing leasing. They started working someplace else, and they got into leasing. And if that, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if that's not true for you in this room, it's certainly true for your staffs. So like right off the bat, there is this thing that we need to overcome, whether it's terminology, whether it's how you run your business, whatever it is. So that being said, I'm a lawyer, so there's got to be a disclaimer. This is a presentation. This is not legal advice. If you want to talk to me about specific issues, specific challenges, grab me and let's talk. But this is just a presentation. So, leasing and retail sales are very distinct from one another. And the first challenge that I see when I'm talking to companies is a lot of times those lines get blurred. Companies get into leasing, but they keep a lot of their own framework and the old structure and the old way of doing things, and that creates opportunities for both regulators and plaintiff lawyers to come after you. You really have to make sure that everybody from your lawyers, your accountants, your staff, they all understand that we're in a different world right now. And you need the different terminology. You'd be amazed how many times I talk to folks at different leasing companies, and they're still talking about loans and borrowers and things like that. It's a paradigm shift that you have to make with your team. For instance, I'll give you a couple of examples. I get a call a couple of months ago. A leasing company wants me to look at their website. I look at their website and I call them back and I say, I'm really confused because your website doesn't say anything about leasing. I'm looking at this website, I think it's a regular car lot. And like, I don't understand because I just hired this advertising company and we just kind of revamped it and it's supposed to be great. And I'm like, well, hard lesson to be learned, but a lot of folks out there in the advertising space, they don't know leasing. They don't understand the key buzzwords. So you think you're getting great advice, but as this person learned, I mean, he had to completely redo his website because I thought on its face it was very misleading. Had another dealer called me, wanted me to review their document package. They were going up for a line renewal and kind of wanted to get a clean bill of health. It's a big document package. I mean, 50 plus pages. I'm going through it. And I called them back and I said, well, I got one problem. You got one document that says lease, and that's the lease agreement, and everything else refers to a purchase agreement and a buyer's order and all the ancillary product documents talked about all that stuff. And it's going to be really hard for you to withstand scrutiny if you get into a situation with court or a regulator because, yes, you have a lease agreement, good for you. But everything else is pointing in a different direction. So you really need to make sure that your paperwork is in order, that your advertising is in order, that you're doing all the things that point to this is a leasing program and we're not going to fall victim to that challenge that it's really something else. I see a big issue with companies in their servicing letters, email messages, text messages, letters. I see a lot of mistakes with that because what invariably happens, you move to leasing, but you've been using these letters for years, so you just keep on using them. And again, when you're creating that kind of climate, it's easy for a consumer to argue, I was confused, I didn't know, they were telling me this and it should have been that. You have to make sure that your team is properly trained, and I will say, I think that is a huge challenge, just car finance in general. I work with a lot of your people. I don't just work with the lawyers and the compliance folks. I work with collectors and salespeople and collection managers, I mean, throughout the organization. And what they're telling me is I didn't get trained. They told me how to do my job. They told me how to use this software. They told me how to use this tool, but they didn't teach me all the things I need to know to effectively do that job and keep the company safe. And I see that time and time again. And back when I was doing trial work, some of the worst days I had, they weren't actually in the courtroom. They were defending depositions when the plaintiff's lawyers are putting your employees in the box and they're asking them a bunch of questions, and they always hit upon training because they know that's a fertile area. There's not a lot of good training. So by the time it ever gets to trial, they have created this perception that your company's indifferent, that your company doesn't invest in its employees. One of the things that they really like to do is they like to go to your ex-employees, because your ex-employees, man, they don't want to spill the dirt. So you have to be careful about that. You have to make sure, I tell everybody, have demonstrable training. I had one recently with a regulator that they came in to my client, and in the meet and greet, They said, show us your training. And fortunately, this client had made a lot of investments in training, and like, here you go. You want the videos, you want the paperwork, you want the presentations, here. Changes the whole tune of the conversation when you make that first impression. So I really want you to think about how you invest in that. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I know some of you run leasing platforms parallel with retail installment contract platforms. That is inherently very challenging to your staff. I don't even care if you have good training. It's still challenging to your staff because especially your customer service folks, they're sitting there bouncing between accounts, bouncing between screens. 1 minute they're talking retail installment contract concepts, the next minute they're talking leasing concepts. They're human. They get confused. They mix and match. They say things. And that creates liability for you too. So you have to make sure that you're training your folks. When I train the customer service folks, I tell them the first thing you think about when you press that button, take a call, which world am I in? Am I in the retail installment world or am I in the leasing world? That's the first question they have to ask themselves every time. Leasing has a lot of foreign concepts. End of lease options, early termination, residual value. You have to make sure, I don't care if it's the top person in the company, I don't care if it's the bottom person in the company. Anybody that may possibly interact with the customer needs to understand all these concepts. I tell clients, let's do a glossary for you. Let's create some definitions. Let's take the key concepts, make sure that everybody in your organization is on the same page. If they might talk to a customer, they may be asked questions, and they have to be comfortable with, I don't know if that's the case, and they have to be comfortable being able to answer the question if they can. So I think that's a big step. So I walk into a client recently. They've been a client like 40 years. They're a leasing client in the Northeast. And I was supposed to go visit them like right before COVID and just never got there. So finally they invite me back up this summer, and I pull up on the lot, big sign, buy here, pay here. And I see another sign, buy your next car here. And I'm looking around the lot, and I don't see anything about leasing. So I go into the general manager's office, introduce myself because we actually never met before, and I'm like, I got one question for you. How many cars did you sell this year? He goes, we probably average 40 or 50 a month. I said, no. That's how many cars you lease. And how many cars did you sell this past year? We've probably done, I don't know, 10 retail deals. I'm like, then why the heck is every sign on your lot talking about buy here? They made no effort to tell the public what they're really doing. And that's important because lo and behold, no sooner do I leave than they call me the next week. I'm like, hey, we have a customer that complained to the regulator, and the regulator wants to talk to somebody. Will you talk to them? So I get on the phone with the regulator. They're like, yeah, this customer is saying they didn't know it was a lease. Okay, well, luckily their document package is good, and they have a lot of materials, and they've done a lot of things to tell their story. But the customer showed the regulator pictures of all that stuff on the lot, and that there was nothing about leasing. So the regulator, right off minute one, is thinking you're trying to pull a fast one on people. This stuff is important. These details are really important. In training for sales and leasing folks, they always talk about you have to sell the program. This is just an anecdotal impression I have. A lot of leasing folks don't do a good enough job selling the leasing program. Why is leasing right for you? What advantages does it have? Why am I positioning you in this lease? I think that helps a lot. And again, when you're having to defend yourself, if you've taken your people through that exercise, if you've given them that basis of knowledge, it makes things a lot easier. Websites are really important. I would say 75% of the leasing websites that I look at, I find pretty deficient, either because they are confusing, Reg Z and Reg M, or they're just kind of making stuff up, or they're not emphasizing the leasing aspect. So pay attention to that. So why do we care about all this? Because there's something called the mischaracterization theory. And this was big years ago, back when I was doing litigation, and it still has a bunch of teeth today. In fact, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a regulator on this very theory. Basically, what this theory tries to say is leases are just really retail installment contracts in disguise. And this is just an attempt to circumvent our state sales finance laws. And you're calling it a lease, but everything that happens after the fact is really a retail installment contract. So we're going to say this contract is usurious. We're going to say that you violated the state finance laws. And in this day and age, they try to turn all of that into what's called a UDAP violation, which is deceptive acts and practices. And for those of you that have seen me speak before, I drill into this issue. The CFPB, since its inception, has taught a generation of plaintiffs' lawyers exactly how to pursue auto finance companies. They have given them the playbook. Every time they issue guidance, every time that they go after a dealer or a finance company, every action they file, it is a laundry list of things for plaintiffs' lawyers to look at. So it's really important. Not only do you have the right paperwork, not only do you have the right training, not only do you have the right controls in place, but if somebody has to get up there and defend you and defend the totality of your program, that they have enough ammunition to work with. Because that's what I used to run into when I was doing trial work. What do I have to hit them back with? And back then it was very little. Had to create it myself. Okay, you were sued about this. Let's make sure that never happens again. We're going to improve your documents. We're going to put some policies in place. We're going to train your people. All those steps that you take. That's what you have to be doing. And really, that's what this conversation is all about. It's all about being able to tell that story. It's all about being able to discourage whoever it is that's going after you. So one thing that I see a good deal of errors with is Service Member Civil Relief Act. Make sure I don't want this to be an SCRA presentation. It's pretty dry and boring if I do that. But make sure your people, whoever is in charge, when somebody says, hey, I've got an SCRA, I want to enforce my rights, make sure somebody's been trained on that material. Make sure they understand when it does and doesn't apply. Because those things are magnets for litigation, because guess what? Service members got a built-in legal firm representing them. It's called the Judge Advocate General, and they love this stuff. So make sure you understand and your people understand the SCRA rights. I can't emphasize this enough. You have to have a robust complaint management system. A lot of times I get called in after the fact. I was recently asked to be an expert witness in a case. I actually had to turn them down because I agreed with the plaintiff. Dealer didn't like to hear that. But they didn't have a complaint management system. Turns out they had a bunch of complaints where there was a lot of confusion, that there was one salesperson in particular that was talking about a lot of retail installment concepts in leasing, and we heard it over and over and over again from these complaints, but they didn't have a system, they didn't recognize the issue, created a mess for them. So I really want to encourage everybody, teach your people what a complaint is, teach your people what the pathway for that complaint is, who's responsible for it, log these things so you could look for commonality. I had a leasing client earlier this year. Early January, calls me, he goes, well, my year is screwed. I'm like, what's the matter? He goes, well, I got a civil investigative demand from the AG. And this is a very consumer-friendly Northeast aggressive attorney general that's running for governor in a couple of years and trying to build their credentials. So we look at the CID and it all goes back to complaints. Fortunately, this client had really good complaint management. They knew every complaint that they received. They knew every BBB matter. Like in 3 days, they were able to give the regulator everything that they wanted. Haven't heard a peep out of them since. Because that was a really strong first impression. That's very different than a lot of times. Could you call, we need another month to gather this stuff. Well, we don't even know where this stuff is. It's a different conversation when you have your stuff together like that. Be aware of the differences in some credit reporting issues. Again, make sure your people are trained, that there's some really good training out there. CDIA offers it, we offer it, that there's good training out there, but there are specifics to leasing that your folks need to understand. There is a cottage industry of law firms out there that they actually set up credit repair organizations, and their whole strategy is, we're going to create these lawsuits. And it is the #1 lawsuit being brought against the credit industry right now. So make sure your people are trained on this stuff. The issue of personal property taxes is a big one. This pops up. I'm not going to say all states. It pops up in certain states. So make sure that you've got a plan in place for the types of permutations that happen. People moving into different states. How your software is going to work, how your people are going to do those adjustments. That's another one that's become a very popular cause of action. Same thing with customers relocating. You need to teach your people to ask those questions, identify those issues, understand what your lease agreement says, understand how it interacts with your software. I have seen problems get created where the employees don't understand the lease. A lot of times, they've never read a lease. And that's the first thing I do in training. Read the lease. Let's take 15 minutes right now and let's talk about the lease. Let's read the lease. Let's understand what's in the lease. Let's understand the basic concepts. You don't want your people answering these questions the wrong way, because in today's day and age, you could bet there's a lot of conversations being recorded. I've had them played for me by plaintiffs' lawyers plenty of time. So you have to make sure that your people are saying the right things. So, in summary, got a couple of minutes left. If there's one thing for you to take away from this, I want you to go back. I want you to meet with your teams. I want you to ask them, how do we position ourselves? How do we tell our story? If somebody walked in today attacking us, I don't care whether it's a plaintiff's lawyer or whether it's a regulator, how are we going to be able to respond? Do we have training? Do we have controls? Do we have the types of things that allow us to defend ourselves? If you could do that, that alone, that is the most important thing that you could do to protect your business. We offer a lot of tools. We've got a training platform. Our monthly webinar series is completely complimentary. We don't charge for it. We talk about these issues all the time. Tip of the week's email, same thing, totally complimentary. We put on a compliance-related conference every spring. If you want to be on our mailing list for the tip of the week, the webinars and stuff, just send us an email. We'll get you on the list. You do not have to be a client to call. Pick up the phone. We will gladly talk to you about whatever issue you want to talk about. Again, thanks you to Tim, LHPH, a wonderful event. Appreciate being here.